My name is Siobhan. I was 48 years old until 3 months ago. If you asked me who I was, my answer would be immediate and precise: a quantum physicist at the prestigious Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies. That wasn't just my profession, it was my identity, the foundation upon which my entire worldview was built. Today that answer seems reductively simple, almost a falsehood. Today I am Rak, a woman who died and came back and who is no longer the same, the life before, an architect of reason. My whole life has been a hate of reason, from childhood spent among books and the windswept landscapes of the Irish coast. I was fascinated not by the mythology of my land, nor by the stories of the Bunch or the fairies that my grandmothers whispered by moonlight. No, I was obsessed with the patterns, the rules, the logic that governs the natural world. About 7 years ago, while the other children played in the park, I observed the spider webs and tried to map the perfect geometry of each thread. At 10, I asked my father for a microscope for every occasion. On my birthday, at Christmas, always the microscope. A practical man who worked in construction, trying to understand his extraordinary daughter, the girl who preferred the Encyclopedia Britannica to cartoons. At 16, while my classmates stated and went to discos in Dublin, I spent my nights in the school lab programming antiquated computers to simulate particle collisions. Physics wasn't just an interest, it was an obsession, a way of breathing. It promised something that no religion, no philosophy could offer: verifiable truth, not dogmas, not blind faith, not the empty consolations of a religious tradition that saw pure truth as a medieval relic, written in the code of the universe. My path led me to Cambridge University, then to Oxford and finally to the Dublin Institute for Advanced Study, where at 32 I was already one of the most respected physicists in Europe. My work on the symmetry of cosmic strings had been cited hundreds of times. I was invited to international conferences, I received awards and, more importantly than all that, I had answers, or at least I had the methodology to find them. My life was not a romantic one. I had few close friends, relationships that died a slow death due to my lack of interest and trivialities. My apartment on Bigot Street was Spartan: a bed, a sofa that I never used, piles of books and a computer that was my real home. I had no children. My parents, traditional Catholics, prayed for me. They literally prayed for my spiritual redemption. I smiled condescendingly when they visited. "Darling," my mother would say, holding a worn rosary, "there's still time for you to find faith." I kissed her forehead less and thought, "Dear mother, you are one of the best human beings I ever knew. Why do you waste your intelligence on superstition, philosophical materialism?" My strong and unassailable strength. My convictions were not simple. Skepticism was a fortress built with the bricks of the scientific method, cemented with the mortar of empirical evidence. For me, the universe was a closed system, a cosmic clockwork mechanism of astonishing complexity. Yes, but ultimately, comprehensible. Every movement was deterministic, every event had a material cause, and that material cause had a previous cause, in an infinite chain that went back to the Big Bang. No, there was a need for God. In fact, the idea of God was an obstacle to true understanding. Consciousness, an epiphenomenon, a beautiful and complex phantom generated by the electrochemical activity of 150 billion neurons firing in the skull, an illusion of self generated by the machine. You think you are choosing, you think you have free will, an illusion. Your thoughts are the result of synapses, of neurotransmitters from the chemical system. You are no more free than a pinball machine. What is free is the will, the soul, the transcendent consciousness, all the constructs that our brain created to deal with the disturbing reality that we are sophisticated machines condemned to death. God, soul, life after death. These were, in my sophisticated analysis, the great placebos of humanity, sophisticated psychological constructs, narratives that our species, singularly aware of its own finitude, invented to mitigate the terror of annihilation. It is a denial of death. It is beautiful in its own way, in a pathological way, but it is false, and the truth is that truth is often ugly. I wasn't just an atheist, I was an evangelist for atheism, a staunch defender of reason, against what I saw as the twilight of superstition. I gave lectures at conferences where I explained the psychological flaws that led people to believe in God. I published articles in scientific journals that not only argued against religion, but treated it as a pathology. I remember a debate in Cambridge in 2016, where I argued with a theologian named James Whitmore. He was a gentleman, with grey hair and eyes that seemed to have seen something I hadn't. He quoted passages from the Bible, I quoted MRI scans of religious brains. He spoke of communion with the divine, I spoke of limbic hallucinations, neuroscience. I had declared, feeling shielded by my irrefutable logic, not only made God obsolete, it demonstrated his impossibility. The audience applauded. Some applause came from Whitmore as well. He approached afterward and whispered, "You're brilliant, Doctor, but brilliance is not wisdom." At the time I thought it was just a sentimental comment from a man who had lost the argument. Today I understand it was a warning. Death for me was the equivalent of turning off a computer. The monitor goes black. The hard drive stops digesting. The end. There was no cosmic drama, no divine judgment, no heaven or hell, only affinity. It was a frightening prospect, perhaps, but it was true, and truth was everything to me. That night I was particularly absorbed. There was something in the simulation that didn't fit, an anomaly in my symmetry calculations. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch. If I could only understand this small detail, everything else would fall into place. I felt it in my gut. I drank my third coffee of the night. I didn't care. The coffee was just fuel. My body was just a vehicle for my mind. I typed a series of commands into the compiler, watching as the computer processed the data. The wait was agony, seconds that felt like minutes, and then the results began to appear. I started to study them, my heart racing with the adrenaline of near discovery. This was the feeling that hooked me on physics, not the money, not the fame, not the recognition of peers. It was this, the moment when the universe was about to reveal one of its secrets to you, only you. No one else had seen this yet. The collapse, when the machine failed, that's when the pain happened. It wasn't ordinary pain, it was a violent and sudden intrusion into my chest, as if someone had shoved a hand inside my torso and grabbed my heart, squeezing it with the intention of destroying it, a crushing sensation, as if a steel press were slowly closing around my heart, millimeter by millimeter. My first typical reaction was annoyance, an inconvenient distraction. Moments of cosmic revelation shouldn't be interrupted by random somatic symptoms, possibly a palpitation, possibly fatigue. I tried to take a deep breath, compose myself, continue typing, but the pain didn't disappear, it intensified. The pain exploded, a white, incandescent agony that radiated through my left arm, making my fingers tingle and lose strength, climbed up my jaw. A relentless tightness that twisted the right side of my face. Cold, sticky sweat broke out on my forehead, running down into my eyes, burning my eyelids. Panic, an emotion I've always despised as irrational and evolutionarily archaic, began to filter through the cracks of my mind. My precious analytical mind, registered the symptoms with terrifying clarity, as if observing myself from the outside. Chest pressure, present. Radiation to the left upper limb, present. Radiation to jaw and neck, present. Diaphoresis, sweating, present. Feeling of imminent death, present. Diagnosis, acute myocardial infarction, acute coronary syndrome. Death and moan. My body was no longer mine, it had become an enemy, a machine rebelling against me. I tried to reach for the cell phone, just inches away on the desk, near the keyboard. It was like trying to reach something through honey. My arm felt like it weighed a ton. My fingers brushed against the black plastic case, touching it, but not quite gripping it tightly enough. It fell. My legs gave way. I fell from my workbench onto the linoleum floor and the world spun. As I fell, I knocked over an entire row of equipment. Monitors swayed, some fell too, and when the monitoring equipment connected to my computers fell, their emergency sensors went off, triggering an alarm, a very loud alarm, the kind of alarm that's designed to alert buildings to emergencies. The last thing I was aware of in the physical world was the dissonant, shrill sound of the alarms, a chaotic chorus echoing through the laboratory, a sound that should have terrified me, but I had already transcended terror. I only felt a fatigue, a growing darkness in my field of vision. My pupils began to dilate, capturing less and less light. Then nothing. The darkness wasn't like closing my eyes, it was more like being switched off, as if someone had flipped the switch on my being. I thought briefly, so this is it, the end of the switch, death, emptiness, nothing, just as I always knew it would be. But it was, the out-of-body experience, observing death. The darkness was not a void, it was a pause, a turning point, slowly, as if my eyes were adjusting to a new way of seeing, as if they had been closed in a dark cave all my life and now suddenly were exposed to the dawn. A perception began to form. I was floating, there was no sensation of weight, nor of body, none of the physical restrictions I had known all my life, just pure consciousness, just me, but a different me, a me that was much vaster than I had imagined, and I saw with a crystal clarity that made 2020 seem like a severe visual impairment. The book of me, the scene in the laboratory was arranged like a model, like a diorama in a natural history museum. The clarity was incomprehensible, hyper-sharp, more real and more detailed than anything I had ever seen. With my physical eyes, I could see every detail, not just the big picture, but the microscopic, every grain of dust floating in the air, every strand of hair that had fallen from my scalp and rested on the floor, the microscopic patterns on the linoleum floor, worn by decades of scientists' feet walking on it. I saw my own body, Shaban O'Connell, 48 years old, stretched awkwardly on the grey floor of the laboratory. My face was turned to one side, my mouth slightly open. There was a strand of hair. My brown hair was spread around my head like a fringe, although a fringe of a woman in agony and death. My white blouse was partially unbuttoned, my left foot pointed at an unnatural angle. My body seemed small, fragile, somehow pathetic. Aquil, Ira, me, that object on the floor, the machine that had spoken for 48 years, and I felt nothing for it. There was no mourning, no attachment, no sense of belonging that you would expect to have for your own body. It was like observing a mannequin and a shop window. Interesting, I thought, but not mine. The pain had disappeared, completely. The panic had evaporated like dew under the morning sun. In its place was a deep calm and an intense, almost scientific curiosity, as if I were finally observing reality from a point of view that allowed me to understand it, truly, without the emotional distortions, without fear. I watched as Sheemers entered the room. Sheemers was the old night security guard of the institute, probably in his 70s, with a shuffling gait and his kind face, full of wrinkles. He had worked there for 35 years, since he was a young man. He knew all the scientists, knew their names, their habits. He knew I was a night worker. His pace was slow, almost as if time had specifically dilated so that I could observe every detail of what would follow. He held a flashlight with a yellowish bulb that emitted a warm, ancient glow. No one had said the fire about LEDs. The beam of light danced over the physics bookshelves, the polished laboratory tables, the computer monitors still on, displaying my unfinished code. His routine was always the same. He would walk through the door, turn on the lights, do a quick visual check, then proceed. But this time something was different. This time there were alarms ringing, multiple alarms, and this time there was a body on the floor. I saw his face when he stopped abruptly. I saw his gaze sweep the room until it located me. I saw understanding slowly dawn in his eyes, not an immediate understanding, but a gradual and absolutely horrible recognition that something was very wrong. I saw the blood literally draining from his face, leaving him as pale as wax. I saw his whole body begin to tremble. I saw his hands trembling as he grabbed the two-way radio he carried on his belt. His voice, when he spoke, was distorted and sharp with central panic. "This is Shimmers, third floor of the institute. We have an unconscious person in the theoretical physics lab, unresponsive. Please send an ambulance immediately." To me, the sound was strangely muffled, as if it came from very far away, as if I were listening through water. but the emotional intensity came through crystal clear. I saw the genuine panic on his face. I saw the way his hands trembled as he put away the radio and approached my body. Try to scream, Shimmers, I'm here, I'm okay, but the words formed only in my mind. There were no lungs to give them sound, there were no vocal cords to give them sound. There were no vibrations of molecules to create sound waves. I was a powerless spectator in the theater of my own drama, screaming in a silence that no one else could hear. My scientific mind was in overdrive, trying to rationalize it. This is impossible, a complex hallucination of the dying brain, a noxic projection. My cortex is generating these images as it shuts down. Catecholamines are being released. It's a well-documented side effect of cerebral hypoxia, but the lucidity, the coherence of the experience contradicted all neuroscientific explanations. I was thinking with crystal clarity, while the machine that supposedly generated my thoughts was failing catastrophically down there. The paramedic team arrived in less than 5 minutes, a time that seemed to last hours. From my timeless point of view, they arrived like an explosion of movement and professionalism. I could hear them running up the stairs, hear their feet on the linen floor of the hallway, hear their voices shouting instructions. 3 of them came in, and I watched them cut my blouse with steel rescue scissors, snip, 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 exposing my torso. There was a coldness in their movements, a lack of affection. It wasn't cruelty, it was professionalism. To them, I was just a code to be decoded, a body to be saved or allowed to die. They placed the defibrillator electrodes on my chest, small black pads with red and black wires coming out of them. The older man placed the pads with practiced precision. His fingers knew the way. Cardiac arrest, he pronounced. No pulse detected. Initiate CPR immediately. CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation. I knew the procedure. I had read studies about its low effectiveness, between 10 and 30% outside the hospital for events of this type. I watched as they placed a mask over my face, already beginning to provide oxygen through a hand-squeezing bag. I saw how one of them placed his hands on my chest, beginning the compressions. Very fast, firm pressure, breaks at least one rib in 25 to 30% of patients. The procedures demanded effectiveness at the expense of structural integrity. Once, he counted, 2, 3, 4, and his whole body moved, pushing down, then away, then down again. 1, 2, 3, my body, that thing on the floor that had been mine, was shaken. It should seem aggressive, but it was necessary. No impulse, asked the woman, checking the monitors. No pulse, rhythm, in ventricular fibrillation, charging the defibrillator energized to 200 rules. Step back. Everyone retreated. The older man placed the defibrillator probes, one on my upper chest, the other on my lower chest. I could feel it. No, it wasn't feeling, but I could perceive the energy being stored, as if the universe, the whole body, was holding its breath. Step back, he shouted, and then, Bez, the electric shock coursed through my body, making it arch violently, the muscles contracting against the current. My eyes would have opened if they had been alive to open. My mouth would have opened if it had the capacity to open. Check rhythm, the older man ordered. Still fibrillation, the woman replied, charging again, 300J this time. Step back, BZT, again, the shock, again the arching, again, the waiting. Sinus rhythm, he asked, hope in his voice. No, still fibrillation. I'll start medication. 1 milligram of adrenaline. 4, they continued, compressions, shocks, medication, compressions, shocks, medication. Minutes, passing, my body clock was already dead, but they kept trying, and as this battle for my physical life unfolded, I felt a pull, an irresistible force, not my phantom body, but in my essence, in my soul. Perhaps, although I had denied the existence of souls for decades, it was as if an invisible anchor had been cut and I was being carried by a cosmic current, pulled upwards, backwards, inwards, in a direction that did not exist. In 3 dimensions, the scene in the laboratory began to diminish, to shrink, as if I were ascending in a glass elevator at a dizzying speed. Sounds faded into a distant hum, as if they were being filtered through layers of cotton. The hum transforms the sound into a unique, strangely musical tone, then that transformative tone. But it was not the silence of death that I had always imagined. It was the silence that precedes creation. It was the silence that is full of potentiality, replete with unmanifested possibilities. The tunnel, a passage to the divine. It was then that I entered the tunnel. To call it a tunnel is a poetic injustice. Learning English or Portuguese or any human language is fundamentally inadequate to describe what I experienced. It was a passage, yes, but it wasn't made of matter. It wasn't made of rock or wood or any physical substance. Roth, witness of light, but it wasn't light as I knew it. It wasn't the electromagnetic light of the visible spectrum. It wasn't photons traveling at 300,000 kilometers per second. It was something fundamental. It was the very essence of luminosity, conscious living light, a light that didn't come from an external source, but it was its own source. Each point in space was simultaneously the center of emission and the receptacle. There was no hierarchy of brightness and darkness, there was only illumination, revelation, absolute transparency, and color. Even to say color is reductive. It was a white that contained all colors, but not in the way you see a rainbow. It wasn't a decomposition, it was a unity. A whiteness that didn't obscure, but revealed it. The further I advanced, or was advanced through this luminous white, the more I could see not only things, realities, dimensions of being that I never knew existed. As I moved through it, I felt a peace that defies description with words that were invented for the three-dimensional world. It was the absence of all fear, of all anxiety, of all desire, of all need, of all lack. It was the feeling of returning home, to a home that my soul had always known, but that my mind had forgotten or had been taught to ignore. I thought of my decades of skepticism, of denial, of rejection of spirituality as a psychological weakness, and when I thought about this, I didn't feel condemnation, I didn't feel punishment, I felt understanding, as if this light knew every doubt I had and embraced them all. My consciousness, free from the shackles of the brain, began to expand. It was like spending my whole life reading a single book in a dark room, reading word by word, page by page, with slow and laborious comprehension, and then suddenly being transported to the Library of Congress, or perhaps, even better, to a cosmic library, where all the books in the universe are open simultaneously and you can read them all at once, not sequentially, simultaneously, all at the same time. Knowledge flowed to me, knowledge that made all my study of physics seem like learning the alphabet, not as raw data that needed to be processed, but as innate, integrated, living understanding. I knew things, I knew them deeply, I knew the answers to questions I didn't even know I had. I saw the structure of the universe, not in equations. I still knew that the equations I had written in the laboratory were shadows, approximations of a much deeper reality. I saw the structure in geometric forms of light and sound, a symphony of such pure and penetrating beauty that it makes you question whether the beauty you knew in the physical world was nothing more than an echo, a pale reflection of this true beauty. I saw the interconnectedness of everything. Gravity was not a separate force. It was the breath of the universe, the pulsating being. The quantum world was not strange and separate, it was the intimate dance of God with himself. Matter and energy were not different things, they were different notes in the same symphony. Time and space were not a stage where events occur. They were themselves created, shaped, sustained by a more fundamental reality. Everything danced together, everything revolved together, everything was a perfect unity. The theory of everything that I had sought for decades in supercomputer simulations, writing articles, presenting at conferences, searching for a mathematical solution, it was revealed to me in an instant of pure gnosis, and its beauty, its elegance, its perfect simplicity, hidden beneath the apparent complexity, made me cry with joy, a pure and bodiless emotion, but as vivid, as real, as penetrating as any tear I had shed in my life. And while I cried, I realized that the knowledge of this truth was the answer to the most fundamental question, why? Because there is something rather than nothing, because someone loved the idea of existence, someone loved the idea of beauty, of knowledge, of communion, and then came the end, or perhaps the center, perhaps both simultaneously, the presence, the encounter with the divine. At the end or at the center of this luminous passage, was the presence. There was no transition. In one moment I was traveling through the luminous tunnel, knowledge flowing to me like an uncontrollable flood of revelation. In the next, I had arrived as if I had always been here, as if this were my true destiny, since before the creation of time. The presence was unmistakable. There was no doubt, no ambiguity, no possibility of error or that it was a hallucination or a projection of my dying brain. None. It was absolutely indisputably real. It was the focal point of all the light of all existence. It was a consciousness of such magnitude that our sun would be a candle beside it. If you could put all the billions of trillions of human minds that have ever lived into a single mind, it would be like comparing a microscope to a galaxy. It wouldn't even be close to being in the same realm. And my being, in its deepest core, knew, despite decades of intellectual denial, of meticulously constructed arguments against the existence of God, of a lifetime dedicated to demonstrating that religion was cheap psychology and medieval philosophy, my soul recognized its creator, Jesus Christ, not the Jesus of the paintings I had seen in the Irish churches of my childhood, a man in sandals and a white robe, weakly humanized. This was the cosmic Christ, the Logos, the word through which all worlds were made, as John had written 2,000 years ago. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, were created through him. Yes, all the truth of cosmology, all the beauty of physics that I had sought, all had been done by him. This man, if he is a man, is not nearly adequate. The power that emanated from him was absolute, Potter. Power that held the atoms in their structure, power that moved galaxies, power that orders chaos into beauty and meaning, but it was a power intertwined, impossible to separate, with a love of unimaginable intensity. It was a love that saw me completely, every thought I had, every action I committed, every moment of pride and self-satisfaction, every time I had argued with a sincere priest about the impossibility of God, every moment I thought I was smarter than history, tradition, the accumulated wisdom of billions of believers, every flaw, every malice, every subtle selfishness, and he did not retract, did not turn away with some kind of contempt, cosmic. It enveloped me, knew me completely and loved me deeply, not despite my flaws, but through them, as if saying, yes, I see all that you were, all that you did, all that you are, and I choose to love you completely and absolutely. His communication did not use words, nor telepathy, as I would have described it. It was a transmission of pure thought, much richer and more precise than any language. It was as if everything he wanted to communicate was appearing simultaneously in my consciousness, in multidimensional colors and textures that no human word could capture. Shaban, my name pronounced by him, although pronouncing is not the right word, it contained the story of my entire life. It contained every moment, every failure, every small act of kindness that I thought no one had noticed, every true rejection I had made, every time I had chosen reason over humility, but it also contained forgiveness, whole, abundant, unconditional. You sought the truth in the shadows of matter. He communicated, while the source of truth was here in the light. I wanted to apologize, I wanted to justify myself, to tell him about my Catholic upbringing that had rejected me, about the contradictions I perceived in religion since childhood, about how science seemed to offer a rational alternative, but he continued his communication and it must have been like an ocean of light, like a wave of understanding. Your search for science was not wrong, Shaban. That mind that yearns to understand my creation is following a sacred path. The desire to understand how things work, to seek patterns and laws, to want to reveal the secrets of the universe, all this is good, all truth is my truth. The mistake was pride, and with this I felt a difficult truth, but lovingly communicated. You believed that creation was all that exists, that the human mind was the final and definitive measure of all reality, that reason was the absolute arbiter of truth. But reason, Shaban, is an instrument, a marvelous tool, yes, but it is still only a tool. It is not the source. I am the source. The visions, past, present, future, then before me or within me or both. Space no longer meant anything. The universe since Bruce was like a cosmic scroll. I began to see creation. I saw the singularity, but not as a physicist might describe it, not as a point of infinite density and infinite temperature, where all the laws of physics disintegrate. I saw the singularity as a thought in the mind of God, a pure ideation, an explosion of creative intention, the decision to bring being out of non-being. Energy in its most fundamental form was not a strange thing made of quantum and strange properties. It was reified, it was communion taking shape. It goes to explosive, the Big Bang, not as an accident of physics, but as an act of divine will, an exhaustion of creative energy. Space and time were not unpacked from the singularity as if in a bag, they were pronounced into existence by the word. I saw the dance of galaxies that unfolds from this initial creation. I saw the formation of billions of trillions of stars, each one a small sun, each one potentially inhabited by lives that cry out to God. I saw the shock waves of supernovas, the whirlpools of black holes, the large-scale cosmic structure, all in perfect motion, all following a pattern that was simultaneously random by the probabilistic standard and absolutely deterministic. Because nothing escapes the will of God, via Earth, our small blue sphere, gradually cooling from a ball of incandescent magma, saw the magnetic shield close around it, protecting it from solar radiation. I saw the oceans in the Ramsay form, the water precipitating from the clouds in incomprehensible quantities via the chemistry of life. The organic compounds, the Ramsay form, in the hydrothermal depths, the first ribosomes to replicate, the first genes to emerge, and there, at each stage, was the hand of God, not like a watchmaker who winds a watch and sets it to work, but like a loving father, guiding each step, directing each quantum possibility towards flourishing, life, beauty. I saw life emerge in the oceans, not as a random chemical accident, but as a deliberate intention, guided, nurtured via evolution. Yes, evolution, because God hadn't said he wouldn't use evolution. Intelligent design and devolution, I thought now, were not opposites. Evolution was perhaps the most elegant method of creation, the most refined engineer, because it allowed creation to create itself in a certain way. It allowed life to have agency, to have freedom, to have the dignity of becoming, through the beauty of the laws of physics, those constant, universal, finely tuned laws that allowed a habitable universe to exist. The physicist Stephen Hawking had calculated that a change of 1 part in a billion in some of these constants would make life impossible. It wasn't a coincidence, it was the artist's signature on his masterpiece. It was God saying, I create with purpose, I create so that there may be life, I create because I love. But then the visions changed, the light of cosmological visions began to dim slightly, not because the presence was abandoning me, but because I was being shown something different, something that demanded a different sobriety. I saw the earth in the present, I saw human cities, civilizations, cultures, I saw the beauty of human things, an elderly couple having coffee together on a balcony in Rome, having shared 70 years, a mother singing a lullaby to a frail baby, even with hunger all around him, a monk in Tibet, meditating in silence for 40 years, his face marked by time, but his eyes full of peace. But I also saw suffering, I saw greed, I saw lust, I saw hatred, I saw the wars fought, not for land, but for oil, for power, for ideology. I saw the powerful exploiting the weak, I saw nature being destroyed by endless greed. More and more I saw humanity turning more and more to its screens, to the promise of some digital salvation, to platforms that promise community, but deliver isolation. And then the presence began to show me the future. I saw Earth in the near future, cities even more dazzling than now, technology integrated into every aspect of life, cars that drive themselves, houses that anticipate your needs, algorithms that know your desires before you know them. It seemed like a utopia, it seemed like the promise of perfection. The final deception will not come covered in fear and tyranny. Shorban communicated his presence and I felt the gravity in his tone. It will come covered in comfort and convenience. He will not present himself as a dictator wielding a sword. He will not present himself as a savior, promising unity, peace and security. He will offer you exactly what you desire, and when you accept your gift, Termiers, accept slavery as well. I saw a global information network, a shimmering web enveloping the entire planet like a dome. I saw humanity connected as never before, billions of people communicating instantly across continents. But as I looked closer, I saw that this connection was an illusion. I saw each person in their own cocoon, in their own personalized world, a universe made exactly to their liking. Their prejudices, their weaknesses, the algorithms were everywhere, invisible, gently shaping what each person saw, what each person thought, what each person desired. It wasn't gross tyranny, it wasn't obvious propaganda, it was micro-manipulation so subtle, but the effect was